in relations, right? In which at some points Kim Jong-un and Trump started exchanging letters. And ratcheting down tensions. Bob Woodward, who's releasing that tell-all type book, is giving excerpts from those letters, and they're pretty fucking terrible. With Kim Jong-un, in quotes, because he didn't actually write any of this shit, saying how great it was to talk to I think he used the words eminence, was it? In those letters? Something like that, right? His eminence talking about President Trump and how amazing it was to shake his hand, how the whole world watched, and this will be remembered forever, right? So the good part is that we stepped back from the edge of war or whatever was going to fucking happen, right? So we stepped back from the edge of that. But as far as I know, the North Korean program was not halted, right? The nuclear program, which is the whole point of all of this, was never halted. Yeah. So we didn't actually accomplish anything, right? Trump made a lot of big promises as how we were going to advance ourselves. He had this whole big meeting when he went to the DMZ, right? We all that, but then nothing happened.
Well, Prime, I want to
let Dylan. You've talked a lot. I want to let Dylan in, and then see what he has to say. He might have a better recollection of the timeline as well. Dylan.
You know, we can all shit on Germany during World War II. It's real easy, but we should really remember the Treaty of Versailles. We really should just talk about the Treaty of Versailles here. It's really important to mention the Treaty of Versailles and how humiliated Germany was and the conditions. It's really important to really acknowledge that as right wingers when we talk about the condition that Germany faced. That's what a lefty sounds like when they bring up the conditions of sanctions on North Korea. I mean, that's what you sound like. I'm just gonna mute you and not listen to you because you got to talk. It's my time to talk now. It is horrible optics. Number one, you're basically when you're saying this, you're basically making the left look like complete imbeciles, maniacs even. You know all that commie Joe Biden shit that like they push around. You actually just look like the actual like picture perfect thing that the Republicans would want the Democratic Party to be, right? The type of people who bend over backward for Castro, right? The Cuban vote loser, as I would put it, right? Now,
yes, because I don't critique North Korea.
I didn't know I was talking to you, and only you.
Seriously, just Dylan's talking. Just Dylan. Go ahead, Dylan.
And if you're taking this in, and you think this is directed at you when I'm directing this at basically lefties who do this in general, then you're just projecting. Okay? Look. It is important to know the history of why a country is in the condition it is. And we can bring up sanctions, but we can also bring up the fact that it was in the 60s that South Korea overtook North Korea, and then North Korea followed that up with assassination attempts on the South Korean leadership because of the economic expansion, and they saw that with time, and it was true, that it would be impossible for the North Korean leadership to take over South Korea in traditional military means. They saw that in the 60s, way before the Soviet Union fell, and that economic trade and prospects and all that was given to the South, to the North, way before that ended. Now, it is true that the economic sanctions, of course, worsened this, right? It is true that the economic aid worsened this. This is 100% true. But it is completely illogical to say that it was just the economic situation that produced the North's illiberal attitudes, because the South and the North were both economically not very liberal. But following the Korean War, the economy that took off was not South Korea. It was North Korea. North Korean economy expanded. The South Korean economy was in shambles. It was under the gutter. It was completely under the gutter. And it was waited until the 60s and the 70s for the North Korean government to overtake it. And as time went on, the South Korean government liberalized, but the North Korean government didn't. Now, there is the argument that maybe with time, the North Korean government could have liberalized if it became economically prosperous. That is true. But I heard the same exact argument brought up about China, that with economic liberalization and economic prosperity, China would become a liberal democracy, and they currently have Muslims in concentration camps. So I don't know if I would give that argument too much weight. So it is true that we should talk about instances like No Gun Re during the Korean War and the conditions that sanctions place on the North Korean state. But we should talk about that in historical context and not as a way of forgiveness for the crimes of the North Korean state. Because if we talk about it in that context and have the kind of North Korean Juche-stan flags in our Twitter accounts, all we're doing is giving the right wing ammunition. And at that point, you're just kneecapping the left, and you're not part of my left.
Okay. Before anything else happens, I just want to say thank you to Show and Chad, who gifted a hot tier 1. Continuing gift. Sorry, excuse me. Your continuing gift that you got from Finger previously, and welcome to the Rich Generation. Really appreciate that. So that was one thing that happens, Dylan. But okay, so I didn't bring in sanctions. I actually didn't say anything about sanctions. I was just talking about the ineffectiveness of Trump's foreign policy.
Well, yeah, I didn't even get to mention Trump's foreign policy. I'm sorry about that. So Trump's foreign policy was a failure on every account. He comes in doing the normal neocon bullshit. Like, not only that, but to a whole level of fire and fury, that was extremely dangerous rhetoric, right? The North Korean state, when you talk about the most dangerous instances in American nuclear history, it's when we thought they were going to strike. It's when our radar systems glitched, and it was like one person stopping the whole world from going kablooey. When you talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's when we thought everything was going to go to shit. And definitely he worsened that situation. But then he 180s his policy, and of course, conservatives were like, well, actually, he was big brain. He was showing them the tough attitude, and then they were going to cave. They didn't. What we did is we caved to their position. We stopped our military drills, which are integral to South Korean security. We started giving this type of praise and pleasure to Kim Jong-un. Oh, he's such a nice guy. The North Korean people love him. He's this, he's that. You know, the basic. He was going like that to Kim Jong-un at that point, right? Mm-hmm. And then they did the whole letter exchanges, which were really cringe. It amount to him just saying, Trump, you're so big, your muscles are so big, your penis is so large. All we did was basically praise this dictator who is not even in our power. At least you can somewhat understand why he would praise someone like El-Sisi and call him his favorite dictator, because at least he's in his power block and there's a geostrategic political reason. Even if it's not good, you can understand it. But this praising of him, you could say it was a debate tactic. Well, at least if it's a debate tactic, get the goal right. If you're going to take this much of a risk, have a decent kind of like pitch at the end. His pitch at the end was, I'll give you big boy economy. And I'm not kidding. He basically offered to give North Korea McDonald's on every street corner. He didn't guarantee them any military security. He didn't talk about how every nuke would get like maybe some liquid assets how to start the process up. Like, hey, the first maybe we'll give off a few sanctions if you start with a few nukes, but if the process does not continue within 1 to 2 years, we will reapply the sanctions. Right? Now, of course, you have the problems that we had with the JCPOA, which is the fact with the JCPOA, even Obama acknowledged that the Iranian state would use those funds to fund the Quds forces and the IRGC and forces abroad. So as Americans, we would have to understand that if we did loosen some sanctions, some of that money would inevitably go to the North Korean military, which has a whole stranglehold of the state, and would have to go to the probably, if it depends if they continue or not, we would have to have definitely some UN monitors in the situation. Oh, and if they are continuing it behind closed doors, which is very risky that they could, it could go to the North Korean nuclear program. We'd have to acknowledge that. But the thing is, Trump didn't go through any of these processes that would be needed. Nothing. He just basically said, give up all your nukes and we give you McDonald's. That was the Trump policy. And when that was rejected, all that led to eventually 2 years later was the North Koreans blowing up on live television the South Korean liaison office. So obviously, even the policies that was when we talk about the South Korean leadership, and they were doing that were actually quite successful in trying to bridge ties, all of that fell apart. Because at the end of the day, the North Korean state doesn't want to talk to South Korea because they think it's a puppet. They want to talk to the Americans. They see South Korea as an occupied force. They want to talk to the Americans. They want to talk to the big boys, and we weren't buying it because we didn't get the all or nothing diplomacy, which is not how diplomacy works.
Okay. So I'll let Kobe go. Kobe.
Okay. So I just actually wanted to present a actually accurate depiction of the North Korean situation here. To quote from the Kim Jong-sung from the I'm joking, absolutely. I actually wanted to yield my time. I have nothing to say. I already made my point clear. I think Dylan did a way better job. I just want to say, Dylan, you're a big inspiration to me. You're the reason I make my opinions about foreign policy open. So that's all.
Thank you. I'm very happy to have more people on Twitch talking about foreign policy. The whole reason I got on Twitch was to be Vince McMahon money man. Number one, of course, that's my primary reason for doing anything, is to be a corrupt bastard. But number two was to, of course, encourage people to talk more about foreign policy, which is a huge issue. So I'm happy to see anyone on Twitch taking foreign policy more seriously or starting to learn more about it. So I really appreciate you being
You're a huge inspiration to me. So thank you a lot for doing what you do.
Thank you very much.
Dylan, yeah, I'm going to second what Kobe just said. And thank you for having that focus on foreign policy, even though you and I may disagree sometimes on some points. That laser focus you have on something that's so important that so many Americans simply don't pay attention to at all. That the thing that touches so many souls throughout this world, our actions, I think that's an important topic to talk on. So I'm glad that someone like you is doing that here. So thank you for being here, buddy.
Thank you. Now we just need to tell Twitch that since they didn't accept my partnership, they don't care about the war in Yemen, and it's their fault.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, dude, and that's rough. Like, you definitely deserved it. So it's rough. Okay. And so I'll let Dr. K in, and then before I do that, does anyone else want to? Marcavius, you want to get on this? All right. So I'll let Dr. K, Marcavius, anyone else have their hand up? George, you want in on this?
I'm sorry, I have to leave for like 20 minutes. Can I come back on the panel?
Sure. Just
okay,
chill.
Cool. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just have to go do something.
Yeah, chill. All right. George, did you want to jump in on this?
I am good. I just I really thoroughly enjoyed Dylan's overview assessment on North Korean foreign policy. That was quite excellent. Thank you.
Gotcha. Spectre, did you? I'm not sure if you had your hand up. Okay.
For me, this is very simple, right? Like, I don't know the ins and outs of what's going on in North Korea, but the people that do, that I respect, tell me that it's not great. So yeah, I do wish that lefties who don't know what they're talking about would shut the fuck up on this, because it is an optics problem.
Okay, I'll let Marcavius go first, then Dr. K. All right, Marcavius.
Yeah, so I personally made optics mistakes in my past in regards to DPRK, right? While I think it's important to look at, these sanctions and how they affect DPRK and shit like that, and, McCarthyism and how it affects our foreign policy now, and everything like that, or exactly why there's these work camps and everything like that. I don't think that we necessarily need to do it in a way that's scanning for DPRK or for North Korea or anything. I don't think we need to do it in a way that forgives any of the reasons why the sanctions are there in the first place. I do think that, we can talk about how aid money and mutual aid in general is done for foreign nation states, and how it could be ineffective in some regards. Mogadishu is a good example of how it could be ineffective. But I feel like we can definitely approach this issue in a more conscious way, because there isn't a lot of. I called into Dylan's show, I think yesterday, and you made the point that there isn't a lot of news that comes out of DPRK. So yeah, if there's one little bit of news, everybody's going to jump on it, and everybody's going to want to give their take, and they might blow it out of proportion one way or the other. So yeah, we absolutely should be critical of news coming out of a nation state that only allows state news, and we should be critical of news coming from a nation state that pretty much only does capitalist news. But absolutely, there's an optic standard that we need to meet.
Okay, Dr. K.
I mean, you know, I respect Dylan. I think that most of his takes on North Korea are pretty reasonable, and I agree with. So here's some critiques. Is one, I think trying to get North Korea to, stop its nuclear program is a fool's errand. North Korea is never going to stop its nuclear program as long as it sees, basically until unification happens and it no longer sees an existential threat, in its eyes, sitting, right outside its southern border. So, one, they're never going to stop doing that. Two, like, if you basically sanction a country and prevent it from doing trade with 90% of the world, right? And it can't, get resources needed for industrial development. Meanwhile, you have strong men who are being propped up by Cold War USA.
Get closer to your mic.
All right. If you have, the South, which is being held up during the Cold War by U.S., backed strongmen, yeah, of course they're going to develop faster if, the hegemons propping them up, one is clearly stronger than the other. So, like, I don't think, that's a completely valid critique per se. And sanctions really in the modern age, like, they are a weapon to kill. They're not there to punish the leaders. The leaders will get by fine either way. It's really there to punish the people of the country in hopes that it'll make conditions within that country so fucking unbelievably miserable that they have no choice but to overthrow their leader. So, that's what sanctions are there to do, right? That's the point of installing sanctions on a country. And I think it's a very cruel tactic of, international bargaining. And I have a strong belief in national sovereignty for every nation. I believe this for even Saudi Arabia, that within their own borders, they have the rights to decide what goes on there. And so I think, this attempt to subvert, North Korea with sanctions is an attempt to punish them for, being essentially, a belligerent to the U.S., I think is not the way to go about international relations. And really, when it comes to Trump, Dylan was right. The person who we should honestly be given congrats for whatever breakthroughs are being made now with North Korea are probably Moon Jae-in. Like, Moon Jae-in and his government is doing far better work than the Americans are for actually normalizing relationships and progressing, Korean cooperation.
Okay. And before you respond, Redneck needs to leave. Thank you for being here, Redneck. Really appreciate you stopping by. Have a good one. Is there something you want to say on your way out?
He's already gone.
He already left.
Oh, okay. That's okay.
He posted a straw message in there.
Yeah. All right, Dylan.
So I would first actually say that maybe I've just become the sanction defender, but there are definitely uses for sanctions in international affairs. And I think that people who kind of dethrone sanctions have not watched the development of how sanctions are used in modern politics against states like China, for example. Many people don't know this, but we have sanctions currently placed on the state of China. We're also trading with them.
Really hampered their economic development.
The point of the sanctions was not to hamper their economic development. It was sanctions placed on officials who are currently operating concentration camps in Xinjiang, China. The point of it wasn't to punish the Chinese people. It was to specifically target individuals in the process of operating concentration camps, which personally, I have no problem on. Another example of things you could do to specific individuals, which is, this falls under sanctions. When people talk about placing sanctions on a nation, this is actually a lot of times one of the first things that'll be checked off the list is travel restrictions placed on officials, right? So the idea that, like, we're going to make life as difficult as possible for the specific individuals involved in this. This is something that just happened in Belarus, that we didn't only place sanctions on 31 officials. This was the EU, it wasn't us, but they placed sanctions on 31 individuals and then placed travel restrictions. Now, I don't think they're really serious about it yet. I think once they place that on Lukashenko himself, then I'll believe them. But until they do that, I don't buy it. I think it's real politique when it comes to Belarus. So I don't think completely throwing sanctions out the window as a complete tool of just what the only reason of this is to make the nation overthrow by worsening the conditions of it. I don't think that's the only purpose of sanctions many times. And sometimes you can also do arms embargo, specifically to kneecap war efforts or kneecap industries that are being used to do human rights abuses, or target specific industries that are being used to prop up certain war offenses. For example, if we're not going to interfere with Turkey's offensive and crimes, which a UN report just came out on how sexual assault is being used as a weapon of war by Turkish-backed militants in Syria, then the least we can do is target industries economically that are being used to fund the war effort. The steel industry is extremely important, obviously, for funding any war effort in any country. You can't make tanks if you ain't got steel. You can't make airplanes if you ain't got steel. Maybe if we target the Turkish steel industry, as many people proposed after the offensive, then we could have actually had a punishment in line for them, right? Many of the things of liberal internationalism propose that one of the main reasons why modern states, when it comes to interstate conflict, is decreasing, and it's mostly literally within the state conflict, civil wars, Syria, Sudan, etc., is because of the economic ties nations are developing and international institutions. It's not perfect. You have to have some realism in your perspective, but that is part of it. And But the problem is, if there's no economic penalty for those offenses into other nations, example, Iraq into Kuwait, sanctions were placed on them, as it rightfully should have after the invasion in Kuwait. If there's no economic penalty, then the whole purpose of the economic interchangeableness of states preventing war, that whole pillar of liberal internationalism, well, basically every pillar of internationalism, globalism, falls apart completely. And we take away one of the main non-military offensive pillars we have of every strategy that we could use without direct military force. And that was to only address one point of your argument. The other point...
The point of Juche is self-reliance, dude. Like, the entire point is they're trying to...
Well, they're not very good at it, are they?
No, they aren't.
If they were, then they wouldn't need all this trade. If it's self-reliance, then fuck off. Why would I care if they place sanctions on them?
Why do I care if North Koreans die needlessly because they can't?
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying,
after this, I just want to say that after this, I want you guys to have this argument. But after this, I want to have the topic dealing with North Korea and nuclear proliferation in general that I think everyone can comment on. So have this argument, but then I have something for everyone else as well. So that's coming. Go ahead.
This is
wait. You just finished your statement. Let me reply.
Let me finish.
I didn't even get to. I didn't get to finish responding.
Let Dylan finish. Let Dylan finish. Let Dylan finish.
I only responded to one of your, like, I don't even remember all of them. I can only respond to one other point, right? But I will also say Juche is self-reliance. So it's kind of weird that they need to be propped up by the Chinese state for any self-reliance. If it was really what I'm proposing is Juche is stupid. I'm not proposing that it's good that North Koreans are suffering. I just think Juche is stupid. It's a stupid ideology. The idea that they're literally the worst possible nation to do it. Literally, when you think about the resources that are accessible to them. Though. Yeah, but I'm just saying the self-reliance idea proposed by the North Korean government is stupid, and I think any part of actually making their nation, I think it's probably part of the reason why their economy, and they were overtaken by the South Koreans in the 60s, because I'm going to turn it to your other point. I never responded. If you deny that after the Korean War, the economy that was much better off was the North Koreans, and they had a good 10 to 15 years of economic prosperity as they put into industrialization programs, that is the truth. And much of that was bolstered by Soviet support. And you know what? The Soviet Union did not collapse until 1991, and the 90s was the fallout. But the South Korean government, when it comes to their economic expansion, overtook them in the late 60s and early 70s. And that also coincided perfectly with assassination attempts on the South Korean leadership, almost as they saw their economic opportunity floundering, so they had to resort to assassination attempts and terror attacks.
It's weird how all East Asian U.S. allies had this huge economic boom around the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
Yeah, it's because our policy was better than the communist policy.
Okay.
Can we just stop defending North Korea? Can we just stop? Just please stop.
So, are you gonna really say that the Juche ideology of we got to have complete self-reliance, like it was not at all a factor in their economic failure?
Of course it was. I'm just saying, like, you can't attribute all of this
let it go.
delay.
Yeah.
Just let it go. Just let it go. Let it be. Let it be. It's okay. North Korea sucks. Like, North Korea did it bad. Like, it's not that great of a place.
Okay.
It's okay to stand like this.
So I'm gonna introduce another topic that I think everyone here can